Get to understand or get a fuller picture in terms of where this election is going, I want to bring in Dr Hlengiwe Ndhlovu now. Dr Ndhlovu, thank you very much indeed for your time. We do appreciate it. Just out of what Hlengiwe from the IFP was saying, very interesting, because if we look at the results coming out of KwaZulu-Natal, there almost seems to be some commentary around whether the IFP will be speaking to the MK party. But he says they're not going to go into a coalition for the sake of doing so. And if there's no clear roadmap, what do you make of the possibilities even of that taking place? In particular, if we look at what is coming out of KwaZulu-Natal.
Good morning, Chrisetta, and good morning to your viewers at home. So it's quite an interesting conversation, and taking from that conversation from the floor, because KZN has been looked at by everyone. I think you remember how we kept on pushing the IEC to the CSIR to project or to sort of like predict the numbers or the percentage of KZN, and they were saying it's a big province, number one, but also I think from our own reading to say it's complex. So I think it's groundbreaking what has emerged from the KZN province, very unprecedented at this moment, especially given the balance between the ANC and the MK. Yes. So the MK has came and has disrupted not just the KZN but completely. But we do, begin to imagine how KZN governance will look like at this moment. And the numbers that are sitting, are conveniently right now is a coalition between MK as well as IFP. But also IFP, remember, they are part of
the Moon Pact.
Yes, of the Moon Pact. So it will be interesting to see how that unfolds, especially in the KZN province.
Yes.
Because the members of the Moon Pact are not necessarily quite prominent in KZN right now. So it will be lovely to see how, because these outcomes are not only, they've got broader implications at a national level, but they seem to have disrupted the provinces like quite drastically. And it will be interesting to watch what happens in KZN right now. But also taking into consideration that more than 1.5 million people in KZN alone voted for the MK. And it will be lovely to watch how they unfold. But also, I think the part that I'm not quite taking quite well is to say there is still time. We are waiting for the processes. I think the numbers are clear right now to say what are the possibilities.
Yeah, certainly a conversation which is going to unfold, and I'm sure that's likely to also come up because I'm hearing from my colleague Kenny Mapanga that members of this multi-party charter are meeting, and I guess to chart a way for it will be very interesting to see how then the IFP maneuvers between members of this pact, of these political parties that have come together, and also what is likely, what many are predicting might take place in KwaZulu-Natal between the IFP and the MK. But I don't want to jump the gun at all. Let's see what happens there. But I want to talk about what has been unfolding. And I did speak to our previous analyst about that. In terms of the objections, everyone is asking all political parties now about their views on the elections, and in terms of the objections and their overall impression of the results. Are we likely to see more political parties raise concerns? Many of them are still yet to come through here. Leaders of these political parties will give us a sense of that, but are we likely to see more a discontent among these political parties about how the process itself has been run?
Absolutely, Griselda. I think now that we are, above 95% of the counting, and we've had, some of these conversations already surfacing on the space. But what we know is that we came to this moment, to these elections, knowing that there were high stakes, in terms of the elections in general. So it wouldn't be surprising, to see, some of these issues being raised within the space, and in terms of what it means. So, the other issue that we've been watching is, I think the IFP yesterday, they did say they are rejecting the results. They want a recount and all of that. But also it's got implications in terms of the voters in South Africa. What does it mean? But it won't be surprising to see many parties, because a whole lot of things, shifted. A whole lot of expectations that we came with to this conference, they shifted. So it's important also in terms of consolidating, and constituting the National Assembly, who comes, into coalition with who, and that will see us, going into many disputes.
And I want to talk a bit about that, because I think we are at a space and time where we can talk about the broader implications of these results, but not just for political parties, but also for the voter as well. What are we looking at? What are the broader implications for both?
Well, I think for the first time, Griselda, in 30 years, our democracy has been stretched, tested, and I think what is emerging, from the numbers is that democratic citizenship is indeed alive in South Africa. So for the longest time, people have been saying South Africans, they want to maintain the status quo, they don't know what they want. But the conversation that I don't want to get into, though, I want to reject the fact that the MK party is 6 months old. I think my analysis suggests that there's been a lot of work that has been
in the making.
Yes, it's just the announcement, of what it means. But also how South Africans themselves came out to say, we have been talking. We have been saying we are tired. And when they say, maybe on social media and all those different platforms, we will meet at the ballot box, they went out to do exactly that, disrupted every status quo and all of that. And that now has got implications in terms of, we are entering a coalition government at international level for the first time in the history of our democracy. And the numbers are quite drastic because, of course, within the continent, liberation parties have been going down, but not at this sharp curve. As we have done in these elections. And it will be important to watch in terms of important conversations around policies, because when you think about coalitions, we not only think about that, we're thinking about who is coming together and what policies are possible.
Another political party now, of course, the United Africans Transformation, adding their voice to what we were speaking about a bit earlier on with you, Dr. Hlengiwe Ndhlovu. I was asking you whether we'll see more political parties, raise concerns and, discontent about, and they're basically describing it as a manifestation of dishonesty. That's what the UAT says this process is about now. Very interesting on that. But while we see these objections and this discontent, I did say that the conversation that is being had now is after these results have been declared, and then the court actions and what is expected is likely to come after that. What then happens after the results are announced? The process, there's the designation, I think, of members of the National Assembly. The results themselves need to be, talk us through the process.
Yes. So after the results have been announced formally, there needs to be a 7 days, space to address all these contestations and all of them. And then after 7 days, the IEC has to declare results as fair, free and fair. Also, that would have factored, the role of the external observers as well as internal observers in the space. But also I think the tricky period here is the period from that 7 days and the 14 days in which the first National Assembly should be sitting. And that's why we were having the conversation around the coalitions and what is the thinking in KZN, because that period at a national level, it has to materialize. And remember, we are new in all this, and there are differing perspectives and differing views, differing ideologies in terms of how are these political parties coming into a coalition. And then in those 14 days, the National Assembly has to sit. That is going to elect the deputy, the speaker, the deputy speaker, and then all other processes unfold after that. And then, but what is expected also constitutionally in the next 30 days after the sitting, the first sitting of the National Assembly, we are expecting the first, State of the Nation address from the new president. And I think that's the moment that all of us as South Africans are looking up to.
All right, Dr. Hlengiwe Ndhlovu, thank you very much indeed for your time. In just about a moment, I think my colleague Kenny Mapanga is still... All right, we'll continue with our discussion. We're waiting for Kenny Mapanga to get ready. We understand that she'll be speaking to the Freedom Front Plus in just about a moment. We're getting all of that ready. But of course, you did say everyone is fixated now. Never mind everything else that we're hearing about the objections and what possible legal challenges that we will see. But it'll be very interesting to see what South Africa looks like in the next couple of days. I mean, in terms of leadership, not just at national level, but also in the different provinces. It's likely to take a shape that we've never seen before.
Absolutely, Griselda, we are going to see. So at the moment, I think the ANC is leading 7 provinces out of 9, but also there are no, there are quite a few outright majorities in terms of who's taking up the province.
Yeah.
So that will also mean, some trade-offs in terms of who do you give, even in that coalition, who do you give this province, and then what are you getting in return? But also, I think the biggest concern here is, will these negotiations really center, South Africans who are the voters, in all this process? We don't want another, situation whereby we see a contestation of power dynamics without necessarily putting other citizens, at the center. So there are urgent processes that the different political parties have to embark on so that they constitute a government, but also not a government for their own interests, but a government for the interests of the country.
But that doesn't seem to be what has been taking place. The interests of the community, the interests of the electorate seem to have taken the back foot in terms of versus the needs of political parties and those that belong to those political parties. So how do we see any of that happening any different this time around?
It hasn't been, Griselda, you are right. So the communities or the citizens at large, they've never been at the center of these negotiations or discussions. But what is important, if political parties and whoever will be taking over after the next few days, they fail to read this particular moment, how South Africans came out to say, we are tired of the abuse, we are tired, of the things that we've been talking about. If they don't take a moment to introspect and to say, then how do we take, the country forward? I think that citizens have come out and sent a very clear and strong message. If we work, on the theory that the MK is barely 6 months old, and then we're seeing these numbers, then if we take that theory, South Africans were not voting in terms of because we've seen the promises and that have been made by the MK, because in actual sense there isn't. But also they were sending out a clear message to say, we are the citizen, we hold this country.
Is that an indication, sorry Doc, sorry to interject, is this an indication of fed up South Africans with the current status quo, and the fact that there have been a multitude or a myriad of challenges that they've raised concerns about that simply have not been addressed? I mean, I'm talking about load shedding, for example. We haven't had load shedding in the longest time. That's wonderful. That's great. May it stay that way.
But we're not sure. We might see it tomorrow.
Let's not jinx it, please. Let's not jinx it. But just before I come back to you, Doc, we will be speaking to Dr. Hlengiwe from the FF+. So we're just waiting for my colleague, Kenny Mapanga, to... All right, these are the visuals you can see. He's still busy with other interviews at the moment, but of course, we expect Kenny Mapanga to go in there very shortly to talk about what is the way forward, of course, for the FF+. We've also heard in the conversations that we had this morning that some of, the voters that had otherwise moved from those that moved from the DA to the FF+ have now gone back to the Democratic Alliance. Kind of sounds like a ping pong situation, left, right. But anyway, we'll talk about that, Dr. Hlengiwe. Sorry, please continue.
Oh, yes. So
on the issue of load shedding, we were jinxing that.
Yes, we're talking about load shedding and how these promises have been on the space.
Yes.
And we've been talking about, South Africans, whether they were being fed up or what message they were sending. I think social media was quite interesting yesterday. People saying, South Africans, I think one of the tweeters was Dr. Ntombi, who says South Africans have just walked out of an abusive relationship. It was so interesting, but also if you read that very closely and listen to what South Africans have been saying, because I don't think the vote, for the MK in particular, of course there are more nuances behind that.
Because we don't know what the policies are. We don't know, they've not yet sat.
Yes.
To elect leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't know what makes up the MK
Yes.
party.
So this is a South African who says, I don't care whether it's a political party that was born yesterday, as long as I identify with, because there is also an identity politics here. So I am going to give them vote, anyone else, but not you.
Is identity politics good? And I must ask you this because we also heard what Bosa's leader, Mmusi Maimane, he had cautioned against it. I know that the MK party, there's the sentiment that just because in KwaZulu-Natal, Ngamazulu, and you look at the Patriotic Alliance, it's the section of the colored population. Is identity politics a good thing? Because is there anything wrong with identifying with something and deciding to support it because it looks like me?
Yes. So I don't necessarily think identity politics is wrong per se, and I'll explain why. It's an expression of our democracy, but also in terms of how the Rainbow Nation ideology has failed the South Africans. So what we've seen of late is that even these small political parties, they're emerging, but also more like as, interest groups. So when people, get into this broader church, and then nothing is giving from there because the democracy hasn't really materialized. And then they think of different strategies in terms of how do we then, make it work for us. And then when you see these different formations in smaller political parties that are almost like, they aligned towards identity politics.
Yeah.
It's people trying different interest groups, trying to express their diverse needs because the collective democracy hasn't actually given, a way of redistributing equally to everyone, and hence we will see this re-emergence of not re-emergence per se, but it's resuscitated because it never left. We've never addressed the rainbow question here in South Africa, and it is expressed now with these different political groups.
Is that now being exposed by what the likes of Mmusi Maimane describe as ethnic mobilization? Because this Rainbow Nation has not dealt with the concerns of all of us. It has dealt with the concerns of a certain section of a population, which then you have other sections of the population saying, but this has not worked for me. Let me rather go look for someone and pin my hopes that the person who looks like me is going to be able to help me.
Well, absolutely, and I'm loving the fact that you are using the example of Mmusi Maimane, because we had this conversation, about himself when he left the DA, to say even the identity politics within the DA in itself was a challenge, right? But we continue to see this emerging, to say, but also I think to have a fair, honest conversation about this is that post in 1994, we never took a moment to regroup, as a country and try to understand how do we understand our diversities. We went into a kumbaya moment without necessarily working through, some of the tensions that existed, and bit by bit they kept on exposing themselves, like other issues like violence. Violence is something that we carry from the apartheid state, and then we enter this democratic moment carrying all those burdens, and they will, one way or the other, find expression if citizens are discontent, especially if we talk about material issues like day-to-day, things of survival and all of that. It becomes quite important.